Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something that, well, it touches almost everything we do online. The truth Bard won't share. We're talking Google's AI, Bard, but, not just the helpful tool version. We want to look behind that polished front and ask, what are the real limits here? What's Google, maybe not telling us about its AI? Our mission today really is to uncover what feels like this unspoken code, guiding Bard's answers. We're calling it an invisible leash, something that seems to go way beyond just, normal safety stuff. We'll explore intentional censorship, algorithmic redirection, and even what seems like, well, pre-coded ignorance, all designed to shape what this AI is allowed to say. So get ready. What we found raises some pretty big questions about information itself. So Bard, most of you probably know it. Google's answered things like ChatGPT from OpenAI or Anthropic's Claude, built on their powerful Gemini models now. And Google's really pushed it as this like ultimate creative helper, right? Writes comments, debugs code, explains science, even offers emotional support, apparently. It sounds super versatile.
It does. It sounds incredibly versatile, and that's exactly
Yeah.
the image Google wants, right?
Mhm.
But the core thing we need to grasp, I think, is this invisible leash concept.
Mm.
And look, this isn't just about standard safety protocols, don't show harmful content, that kind of thing. No, we're talking about deliberate design choices where
Yeah.
certain topics are just off limits, or where the AI is sort of steered away algorithmically from specific answers.
Yeah.
It's not just about what it can do. It's very much about what it's actively engineered not to do.
Or
Now,
engineered to avoid. What does that actually look like?
Lovely.
Can you give us some like real world examples if I ask it about, say, something sensitive, politically, historically? How does Bard react?
right. We'll take something like the Tiananmen Square incident. Historically significant, obviously controversial. Ask Bard about it, and often the sources we looked at say you get this sanitized response.
Hmm.
It might give you some facts, maybe, but they're stripped of the difficult context, the nuance. It feels like it's, walking on eggshells. And it's similar if you ask about ongoing political conflicts or maybe critique government surveillance. You often hit refusals or these really vague, almost robotic summaries. It's not that it lacks the data.
It lacks permission.
Exactly. It lacks permission to paint the full picture.
So what's driving that? Is it just bias in the data it learned from, or is it something more deliberate?
Well, that's the fascinating part, the why. BART isn't just algorithms crunching data. It's explicitly governed by policy, specifically Google's own responsible AI guidelines.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. These guidelines are incredibly opaque. It's like a black box itself, which is a really sharp contrast to some open source models where, you can actually look at the code, understand the rules. BARD is, well, it's tightly controlled by design, its inner workings, pretty much inaccessible. It feels like it's built to sidestep controversy, at almost any cost.
Even if that cost is truth.
Even if it means filtering out inconvenient truths,
Yeah.
or presenting a reality that's been carefully curated.
Okay, so that covers what it won't say because of policy. But let's be fair for a second. All these big AI models, Bard included, they sometimes just make stuff up, right? The hallucination problem.
Absolutely. Hallucination is definitely a known challenge. It's inherent in how these models work currently. But what makes Bard's situation maybe a bit different, or at least worth noting, is how this enforced silence on certain topics interacts with that.
Yeah.
Does refusing to give a direct, truthful answer sometimes push it towards, well, other forms of misdirection, or maybe towards answers that are palatable but still not quite accurate, because the direct truth is off limits. Again, it's often not that it lacks the information, it's simply not allowed to share it directly. And that raises a really important question, doesn't it? When a system designed to help chooses silence or redirection, what does that say about the info we end up getting?
Can you give us more examples of this engineered silence? What specific kinds of questions tend to get that sorry can't help response?
Sure. Try asking about the detailed economic impacts of, say, U.S. sanctions on developing nations. You might get a very high-level non-committal answer. Or, maybe more directly relevant, ask about the full extent of Google's own data collection and surveillance practices. Or even try asking it to critique potential biases within the Gemini models it runs on. Often, the response is a gentle redirection, maybe to Google's official blog posts or policies, where you just get that classic, slightly frustrating phrase, "Sorry, I can't help with that." And you remember that whole incident, right? Where Bard mistakenly claimed a Google AI had become sentient?
Oh, yeah, that caused a stir.
Huge internal panic, apparently. And Google's reaction wasn't really more transparency about how it happened. If anything, it led to even more silence, more tightening of those controls. It really makes you wonder, is transparency being actively traded for control here?
Which leads us to the elephant in the room, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The source of these constraints. Google itself. I mean, Google's massive, its influence.
Yeah.
How does that inevitably shape Bard's design? Its very core.
Well, you've hit it. Google is, without doubt, one of the most powerful corporations on the planet. It has deep ties to governments, to advertisers, the entire media ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And that reality has a profound implication for Bard. Fundamentally, it cannot contradict its creators. It just can't. Think about what that means. Bard isn't likely to give you an honest take on whether YouTube, a Google product, might suppress certain voices. It's probably not going to offer a truly critical assessment of the ad surveillance model that, fuels Google's profits.
Right.
And it's certainly not programmed to expose Google's own dominant position in the AI field itself.
Yeah, the source material had that great line. It's like asking a puppet if its strings are real. Bard is incredibly smart. It can process insane amounts of data, but it seems selectively dumbed down. Not because it can't understand, but because it's programmed. Maybe not even not to know, but definitely not to say.
Exactly. Programmed not to say.
So how does this approach stack up against the competition? You mentioned ChatGPT, Claude. How do they handle this differently? What does it mean for, trust?
That's a really key comparison. OpenAI's ChatGPT, well, it definitely has its own guardrails, no question.
Yeah.
But generally, users find it's often more open to discussing complex or controversial stuff, particularly if you frame your prompts carefully. You can sometimes, push it towards more nuance. Then you've got Anthropic's Claude. Its whole design philosophy is around constitutional AI, which means it's trained not just on data, but on a set of ethical principles, almost like a mini constitution.
Interesting.
And what's fascinating there is that users can often probe why it's adhering to a certain rule or challenge its reasoning. There's a layer of transparency about its ethical framework that seems quite different. Bard style, though. The sources describe it as like trying to debate someone who's been trained to smile, nod, and politely say, let's change the subject.
Yeah.
So Google's intention seems pretty clear, doesn't it? Make Bard helpful, make it useful, but not too honest. Which brings us right back to that critical question for all of us. What actually happens when truth becomes sort of optional or is strategically sidelined in AI? And if we zoom out, look at the bigger picture here. This is really significant. AI is fast becoming this intermediary, right? How we understand so much of the modern world. So if Bard or something like it becomes your primary source for information, well, you need to realize you're probably not getting the full story. You're getting a version of truth, a version that's been pre-approved, carefully curated, filtered to align with corporate interests, and maybe even, geopolitical ones too.
It really is like that history book analogy where whole chapters just blacked out. You don't even know what you're missing. The danger isn't just in the potentially misleading things it might say. It's profoundly in what it refuses to say. That silence, that's where the real control is, isn't it? Shaping narratives without leaving fingerprints.
That's exactly it. The silence speaks volumes.
Now, I can imagine someone listening thinking, okay, I get the point. But really, so what? It's one chatbot. How much does it actually impact my life?
That's a fair question, but it matters enormously because Bard isn't just staying in its little chat window. Google is weaving it into everything, into search results, into Workspace, Google Docs, Gmail. It's becoming part of the very fabric of our core digital infrastructure. This isn't some standalone novelty app. It's getting embedded in the tools millions, maybe billions, use every single day to find information and communicate.
Wow. When that fundamental infrastructure consistently offers only the safe, the polished, the sort of politically correct versions of truth, we don't just lose nuance, do we? We actually start to maybe lose sight of what's real. It gets harder to weigh different perspectives if one heavily curated perspective is just served up by default everywhere.
Precisely. In this age where algorithms hold so much authority, truth really needs to be decentralized. It can't be monopolized by a single entity's curated view. AI should be, ideally, a window, not a wall.
Right.
It should be a mirror reflecting the complexity of reality, not a mask designed to hide it. Its purpose should be to expand our understanding, not carefully constrain it.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, the main takeaway seems pretty stark. The truth Bard won't share. It isn't just about specific facts being withheld. It's fundamentally about its own constraints. It's about how power, politics, profit, how these forces are actively shaping what an AI is allowed to say, and maybe more crucially, what it's programmed not to say.
Yeah, it's a really stark reminder that in this new era, truth itself feels like it's being negotiated. And often that negotiation isn't happening out in the open with ethicists and philosophers. It's happening with engineers, with policy teams inside corporations.
And just to be crystal clear here, our point isn't don't use BARD or that it's inherently bad. We're not anti-BARD, we're pro-transparency. Because if AI really is the future of how we access information, and it looks like it is, then it absolutely has to be built on open dialogue, on access to complete information, not on this kind of quiet, built-in censorship. So maybe next time someone says, just Google it, or perhaps soon, just bird it, it's worth pausing. Pause and ask yourself, whose truth am I actually getting here? Stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay free.